of the arrival. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training camp as recruits gathered for what would become the most intense 8 weeks of their lives. Among the sea of eager faces stood Maya Johnson, a 24-year-old woman whose calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the nervous energy surrounding her. She had driven 12 hours from her hometown in Louisiana, leaving behind her job as a paramedic to pursue something she had dreamed about since childhood. Maya's dark skin glistened with sweat from the humid morning air, but her posture remained straight and confident. She wore the same standard-issue uniform as everyone else, yet somehow she looked different. There was something in her eyes that spoke of determination forged through years of overcoming obstacles that others couldn't imagine. The other recruits eyed her with curiosity and, in some cases, barely concealed skepticism. This was an elite military program known for its brutal physical and mental challenges. Out of every 100 applicants, only 15 made it through the selection process, and fewer still completed the training. Most of those who succeeded came from military families or had extensive athletic backgrounds. Maya appeared to have neither advantage. "Look at her," whispered Jake Morrison, a 22-year-old from Texas whose father and grandfather had both served in special forces. "She looks like she's never seen the inside of a gym." His comment drew quiet snickers from the group around him. Jake had been the star quarterback at his college and assumed this training would be just another opportunity to prove his natural superiority. Standing next to Jake was Tommy Chen, whose family had immigrated from Taiwan when he was young. Tommy had spent years training in martial arts and rock climbing, building the kind of lean muscle that suggested serious athletic dedication. He glanced at Maya and shook his head. "This program breaks people who've been preparing their whole lives. What makes her think she can handle it?" Sarah Williams, one of only 3 other women in the group, felt torn between solidarity and pragmatism. She had been a competitive runner in college and knew how much physical preparation this training demanded. Looking at Maya's average build and lack of obvious athletic conditioning, Sarah wondered if the woman understood what she had gotten herself into. The whispers and sideways glances didn't escape Maya's notice. But she had learned long ago not to let other people's doubts affect her focus. Growing up in a rough neighborhood in New Orleans, she had faced skepticism and prejudice many times before. When she decided to become a paramedic, people told her she wasn't smart enough. When she started working emergency response, some patients requested different medics because they didn't trust a young black woman to save their lives. Each time, Maya had responded the same way. She worked harder, studied longer, and proved herself through actions rather than words. She had saved dozens of lives working ambulance runs through some of the most dangerous parts of the city. She had seen things that would traumatize most people and learned to stay calm under pressure that would break others. But nobody here knew any of that. To them, she was just another recruit who probably got in through some diversity program, someone who would wash out within the first week when the real challenges began. The head instructor, Sergeant Rodriguez, appeared on the training field like a storm cloud rolling in. His voice boomed across the assembly area as he began the initial briefing. Rodriguez had been through multiple combat deployments and had trained thousands of recruits over his career. He could spot weakness and strength within minutes of watching someone move. "Welcome to hell," Rodriguez announced with the kind of smile that promised suffering. "Over the next 8 weeks, we will push every single one of you beyond what you think is possible. Some of you will discover strength you never knew you had. Most of you will discover that you're not as tough as you thought you were." He walked slowly through the ranks of recruits, making eye contact with each person. When he reached Maya, he paused for just a moment longer than with the others. Something flickered in his expression, but it was gone too quickly for anyone to interpret. "Physical fitness is just the beginning," Rodriguez continued. "We will test your mental toughness, Your ability to work as a team, your capacity to make decisions under extreme stress, and your willingness to keep going when everything in your body is screaming at you to quit. The first exercise was a simple 5-mile run followed by basic calisthenics. It was designed to establish baseline fitness levels and give the instructors an initial assessment of each recruit's capabilities. Jake Morrison took the lead immediately, his long strides eating up the ground with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the fastest person in any group. Tommy Chen settled into second place, his efficient running form suggesting years of serious training. Sarah Williams found her rhythm in the middle of the pack, exactly where she had expected to be. The other recruits spread out according to their fitness levels, with a few struggling significantly in the humid morning heat. Maya started near the back of the group, her pace steady but unremarkable. Jake looked back over his shoulder during the second mile and saw her maintaining the same rhythm she had started with. "She'll be walking before we hit mile 3, he called out to Tommy, loud enough for others to hear. But something interesting happened during the third mile. While several other recruits began to slow down noticeably, Maya maintained her pace. Her breathing remained controlled, and her stride stayed consistent. She began passing people who had started ahead of her, not because she was sprinting, but because they were fading. By the fourth mile, she had moved into the middle of the pack. Jake was still leading, but his form had become less smooth as fatigue set in. Tommy was holding second place, but his breathing had become more labored. Maya continued her steady advance, passing tired recruits one by one. During the final mile, something remarkable happened. Maya's pace actually increased slightly. While others were struggling to maintain their speed, she seemed to find another gear. She passed Sarah Williams, then several of the men who had started with such confidence. By the time they reached the finish line, Maya crossed in fourth place overall. Jake finished first, but he was breathing heavily and bent over with his hands on his knees. Tommy came in second, clearly exhausted but trying not to show it. Maya finished looking like she could easily run another 5 miles. Her breathing was controlled, her posture was still upright, and there was no indication that she had just pushed herself to her limit. The other recruits stared in surprise. This was not what they had expected from the woman they had dismissed so quickly. Sergeant Rodriguez made notes on his clipboard, but showed no reaction to the results. The calisthenics portion revealed even more surprises. Maya's push-ups were perfect in form, and she completed more repetitions than most of the men. Her sit-ups were flawless and seemingly effortless. When they moved to pull-ups, where many recruits struggled to complete even a few, Maya knocked out 15 clean repetitions with room to spare. "Lucky day," Jake muttered to the group around him. "Wait until we get to the real training. Running and basic exercises don't mean anything when things get serious." But privately, Jake was beginning to feel the first stirrings of doubt. He had expected to dominate every physical challenge, yet this woman who looked so ordinary had outperformed him in several areas. He told himself it was just a fluke, that his natural athleticism would assert itself once the training intensity increased. Tommy Chen was having similar thoughts. His martial arts background had taught him to respect opponents who might not look dangerous at first glance. Maya's performance suggested she had trained seriously for this, even if it wasn't obvious from her appearance. Sarah Williams felt a mixture of admiration and concern. She was glad to see another woman performing well. But she also knew that standing out early in training could make someone a target for extra attention from the instructors. As the first day continued, the challenges escalated. Obstacle courses, combat simulations, and problem-solving exercises under time pressure pushed everyone to their limits. Through it all, Maya continued to surprise her fellow recruits. She was consistently near the top of every challenge, displaying not just physical capability, but mental toughness and tactical intelligence. When evening finally arrived, and the exhausted recruits were dismissed to their barracks, the conversations were dominated by speculation about the woman who had defied everyone's expectations. Some recruits were impressed, others were skeptical, and a few were beginning to feel threatened by her competence. Maya herself remained focused on the long road ahead. She knew that one good day meant nothing in an 8-week program designed to break people. The real challenges were still coming, and she would need every bit of strength, skill, and determination she had developed over years of overcoming obstacles that others never had to face. That night, as she lay in her narrow bunk listening to the sounds of her exhausted bunkmates, Maya thought about the journey that had brought her to this place. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new opportunities to prove herself, and undoubtedly new attempts by others to undermine her confidence. But she had come too far to be stopped by doubt or prejudice. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to meet them with the same quiet determination that had carried her through every obstacle life had placed in her path. When training turned deadly. Serious week. 3 of training arrived like a thunderstorm, bringing with it challenges that separated the truly committed from those who had simply thought they were tough. The morning alarm sounded at 4:30, 30 minutes earlier than usual, signaling that the instructors were ready to escalate the pressure. Maya rolled out of her bunk with the fluid motion of someone whose body had adapted to the demanding routine. Around her, other recruits groaned and struggled to their feet, their muscles protesting after weeks of intense physical training. The easy camaraderie of the first few days had been replaced by grim determination and growing tension between competing personalities. Jake Morrison had become increasingly frustrated as the training progressed. Despite his athletic background and natural physical gifts, he found himself consistently outperformed by Maya in areas where he had expected to dominate. His initial dismissive attitude had evolved into something closer to resentment, especially when other recruits began looking to Maya for leadership during team exercises. "She's probably been training for this her whole life," Jake complained to his small circle of followers during breakfast. "Some of us have real jobs and responsibilities. We can't just spend all day in the gym preparing for one test." His words carried an undertone of bitterness that had not been present during the first week. Tommy Chen had taken a different approach to Maya's continued success. His martial arts training had taught him to study opponents carefully, and he had been watching Maya's techniques during combat exercises. What he observed both impressed and puzzled him. Her movements showed training and experience that went beyond simple physical preparation. "There's something different about her," Tommy confided to Sarah Williams during a brief break between exercises. "She moves like someone who's been in real fights, not just training scenarios, and her medical knowledge during first aid exercises is way beyond basic certification." Sarah had noticed the same things. Maya's performance in emergency medical situations was remarkably advanced, and she seemed to anticipate problems before they developed. During one particularly challenging scenario involving simulated casualties, Maya had taken charge naturally and guided the team through a complex triage situation with the confidence of someone who had done it many times before under real pressure. The instructors had noticed, too. Sergeant Rodriguez found himself watching Maya more closely during each exercise. Her performance was consistently excellent, but more importantly, she showed the kind of calm decision-making under pressure that could not be taught in a classroom. She was clearly someone who had been tested in real-world situations. On Wednesday of the 3rd week, the training took on a new level of intensity with urban warfare simulations. The recruits were divided into 2 teams and given a complex mission involving infiltration, intelligence gathering, and extraction under simulated enemy fire. Jake immediately assumed he would be chosen as team leader for his group, but the instructors appointed Maya instead. "This is ridiculous," Jake muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "They're just checking boxes for diversity. When things get real, we'll see who can actually lead." Several other recruits nodded in agreement, though their support was less enthusiastic than it had been during the first week. Maya ignored the comments and focused on studying the mission parameters. The scenario involved rescuing hostages from a building complex while avoiding civilian casualties and minimizing team exposure to enemy fire. It was the kind of high-stress situation that revealed leadership ability under pressure. As team leader, Maya quickly assessed her team's strengths and weaknesses. She placed Tommy Chen in a position that utilized his agility and tactical awareness. Sarah Williams was assigned to communications, where her attention to detail would be crucial. She even found ways to use Jake's physical strength effectively, despite his obvious reluctance to follow her orders. The mission began at dawn, with both teams moving simultaneously toward their objectives. Maya's team advanced methodically, with each member knowing exactly what their role would be when they reached the target building. Her planning had been thorough, accounting for multiple contingencies and alternative approaches. Jake's frustration grew as he realized that Maya's tactical decisions were consistently sound. She had anticipated problems he hadn't even considered and positioned team members to handle challenges before they arose. When they encountered unexpected resistance, her adjustments were quick and effective. The breakthrough moment came when Maya's team reached the hostage location and discovered that the situation was more complex than the initial briefing had indicated. There were more civilians present than expected, and the simulated enemies were positioned to make a standard rescue approach nearly impossible, while Jake advocated for a direct assault that would have resulted in significant simulated casualties. Maya developed an alternative approach that used the team's diverse skills to create multiple distractions while she personally infiltrated the building through an overlooked access point. "That's suicide," Jake argued during the quick planning session. "You can't just run in there alone. This is supposed to be a team exercise." His concern might have been genuine, but it was mixed with frustration at being relegated to a supporting role. Maya's response was calm and measured. "Sometimes leadership means taking the biggest risk yourself. You'll provide covering fire and extraction support. If something goes wrong, adapt and complete the mission without me." Her tone carried an authority that surprised even herself. The execution was flawless. While her team created carefully coordinated distractions, Maya moved through the building with a precision that left the instructors taking notes. She reached the hostages, neutralized the simulated guards, and guided the civilians to safety while her team provided exactly the support she had requested. When the exercise concluded, Maya's team had completed the mission with 0 casualties and minimal exposure to enemy fire. The other team, led by a recruit with extensive military family background, had completed their mission successfully, but with higher casualty counts and longer exposure times. Sergeant Rodriguez gathered both teams for the after-action review. His assessment was thorough and professional, highlighting successful tactics and areas for improvement. When he reached Maya's performance as team leader, his tone became more serious. "Outstanding tactical thinking under pressure," Rodriguez stated flatly. "Risk assessment was accurate, team utilization was maximized, and mission execution was nearly flawless. This is the standard we expect from all team leaders." He paused and looked directly at Maya. "Well done, recruit." The praise was significant because Rodriguez was known for his reluctance to offer positive feedback, especially early in training. His acknowledgement carried weight with the other recruits, some of whom were beginning to reassess their initial impressions of Maya. But the recognition also intensified the negative feelings among those who had expected to dominate the training program. Jake's resentment crystallized into something approaching hostility, and he began actively undermining Maya's authority during subsequent team exercises. The situation came to a head during a night navigation exercise later that week. Teams were required to reach specific coordinates using only basic compass and map skills while avoiding instructor patrols in complete darkness. It was designed to test both individual competence and team cohesion under stress. Maya found herself paired with Jake and 2 other recruits for the exercise. From the moment they began moving, Jake questioned every decision she made, suggesting alternative routes and constantly second-guessing her navigation choices. "Just because you got lucky once doesn't make you some kind of tactical genius," Jake whispered harshly during one of their rest stops. "Some of us actually know what we're doing out here." His words were intended to undermine her confidence and assert his own authority within the small group. The other two recruits found themselves caught between competing leadership styles. They had seen Maya's consistent competence throughout training, but Jake's aggressive confidence was also compelling, especially in the disorienting darkness of the forest. The tension exploded when they reached a point where their planned route was blocked by an unexpected instructor patrol. Maya recommended a detour that would add time but ensure they avoided detection. Jake insisted on a more direct approach that would require them to move through areas with higher risk of discovery. "We're not here to play it safe," Jake argued. "This is supposed to test our courage under pressure. Following her scared little route proves nothing except that we don't have what it takes." His voice carried enough volume to risk attracting the patrol they were trying to avoid. Maya made a command decision. "We split up. Jake, take your route with whoever wants to follow. I'll take the detour with anyone who prefers that approach. We meet at the objective regardless of which path we choose." It was a compromise that acknowledged the team's division while maintaining focus on mission completion. One of the other recruits chose to follow Jake, attracted by his promise of a more exciting and direct approach. The remaining recruits stayed with Maya, influenced more by her consistent track record than by Jake's bravado. The results were revealing. Jake's group moved quickly, but was detected by an instructor patrol within 30 minutes, resulting in their disqualification from the exercise. Maya's group reached the objective successfully, having avoided all patrols through careful movement and patience. When the exercise concluded and all teams reported back, the instructors reviewed the results with particular attention to the split decision. Sergeant Rodriguez was especially interested in Maya's choice to divide the team rather than insist on unified action. "Explain your reasoning," Rodriguez requested during Maya's individual debrief. Maya considered her response carefully. "Unity is important, but not at the cost of mission failure. When team members fundamentally disagree on approach, sometimes the best leadership decision is to allow alternative methods while maintaining focus on the objective. Both approaches had merit, so we tested both." Rodriguez made notes, but offered no immediate feedback. However, other instructors had been watching the dynamic between recruits with growing interest. The tension between Jake and Maya was becoming a distraction that affected overall team performance, and something would need to be done to address it. Meanwhile, rumors had begun circulating about Maya's background. Some recruits had noticed that she never seemed surprised by the medical scenarios they encountered, and her tactical knowledge appeared to extend beyond what basic training should provide. Tommy Chen had become convinced that Maya was not who she appeared to be. "Nobody picks up combat medicine that quickly," he told Sarah Williams during their evening downtime. "And her weapons handling suggests serious training, not just weekend shooting courses." Sarah had noticed the same things but was reluctant to speculate. "Maybe she just prepared more thoroughly than the rest of us," she suggested, though privately she had begun to wonder if there was more to Maya's story than any of them realized. The training continued to escalate, with each week bringing new challenges designed to push recruits beyond their perceived limitations. Through it all, Maya maintained her consistent excellence while dealing with increasing hostility from Jake and his supporters. But unknown to all the recruits, their performance had been observed by more than just their immediate instructors. Higher-ranking officers had been monitoring the training program, particularly interested in recruits who showed exceptional promise or unusual capabilities. And Maya Johnson had definitely caught their attention for reasons that went far beyond her performance in basic training exercises. The colonel's arrival. The morning of week 6 began like any other, with exhausted recruits stumbling through their pre-dawn routine after another night of minimal sleep. The training had reached its peak intensity, with complex multi-day exercises that tested every skill they had developed over the previous weeks. Maya moved through her morning preparations with the same calm efficiency she had maintained throughout the program. Around her, the other surviving recruits showed the wear and tear of 5 weeks under extreme pressure. Of the original 43 recruits who had started the program, only 27 remained. Jake Morrison was among the survivors, though his attitude had grown increasingly bitter as Maya's superior performance became undeniable. He had gathered a small group of supporters who shared his resentment, but their influence was diminishing as other recruits began to recognize Maya's consistent leadership abilities. The day's exercise was announced as the most challenging yet, a 48-hour survival and evasion scenario that would test everything they had learned. Teams would be dropped in unfamiliar territory with minimal equipment and tasked with reaching extraction points while avoiding capture by instructor teams playing the role of hostile forces. Sergeant Rodriguez gathered the recruits for the mission briefing. "This exercise will determine who among you has the mental toughness and tactical skills necessary to complete this program," he announced. "You will face hunger, exhaustion, disorientation, and constant pressure from pursuit teams. Some of you will not make it to extraction." As he spoke, a military vehicle approached the assembly area. Rodriguez glanced toward it briefly, then continued his briefing, but there was a subtle change in his demeanor that the more observant recruits noticed. The vehicle stopped, and a figure emerged who immediately commanded attention. Colonel Marcus Wright was a legend in military circles, though few of the recruits would recognize him by sight. His presence at a basic training exercise was highly unusual and suggested something significant was happening. Wright was a man in his 50s whose bearing conveyed decades of leadership in the most challenging military environments. He had commanded special operations units in multiple combat zones and was known for his ability to identify exceptional talent among personnel at all levels. He approached Rodriguez and spoke quietly for several minutes, while the recruits waited in formation. Their conversation was brief, but Rodriguez's increasingly serious expression suggested that the colonel's visit was not routine. "Change of plans," Rodriguez announced after Wright finished speaking. "We have a distinguished visitor who wants to observe today's exercise personally. Colonel Wright will be accompanying the instructor teams during the survival scenario." The presence of a high-ranking officer added a new level of pressure to an already demanding exercise. Some recruits welcomed the opportunity to demonstrate their capabilities before someone who could influence their future careers. Others, particularly those who had been struggling with the training intensity, felt additional stress at being evaluated by someone of Wright's reputation. Maya felt a flicker of recognition when she saw the colonel, though she couldn't immediately place where she might have encountered him before. There was something familiar about his bearing and the way he carried himself that triggered a memory she couldn't quite access. The teams were loaded into vehicles and transported to different starting positions across a vast training area that included forests, rough terrain, and simulated urban environments. Maya found herself leading a team that included Tommy Chen, Sarah Williams, and 2 other recruits who had proven themselves capable during previous exercises. Jake Morrison was assigned to a different team, much to his obvious displeasure. He had hoped to be on Maya's team so he could continue his pattern of challenging her authority, but the instructor assignments had separated them deliberately. The exercise began with each team being dropped at isolated points with basic survival equipment and maps showing their extraction coordinates. They had 48 hours to reach their assigned pickup points while avoiding capture by roving instructor patrols equipped with night vision gear and tracking equipment. Maya's team quickly established a movement plan that balanced speed with stealth. Her navigation skills proved exceptional as she guided them through challenging terrain while avoiding the most obvious routes that pursuit teams would expect them to take. Tommy Chen found himself increasingly impressed by Maya's tactical knowledge. Her understanding of tracking, counter-surveillance, and fieldcraft went far beyond what any civilian training could provide. She moved through the wilderness with the confidence of someone who had done this type of thing many times before under real-world conditions. "Where did you learn to do this?" Tommy asked quietly during one of their brief rest stops. "This isn't stuff you pick up from books or weekend courses." Maya's response was carefully measured. "Emergency medical work teaches you a lot about moving through dangerous areas and staying calm under pressure," she said. "You learn to think tactically when your life might depend on it." It was true, but Tommy sensed there was more to the story than she was sharing. Her fieldcraft skills suggested military or law enforcement training that went well beyond civilian emergency response work. Meanwhile, Colonel Wright was indeed observing the exercise, but his focus was not randomly distributed among all the teams. He moved between monitoring stations with purpose, paying particular attention to the performance of specific individuals. When reports came in about Maya's team's progress, Wright studied the tracking data with intense interest. Her route selection, timing, and tactical decisions were being evaluated against criteria that the regular instructors were not aware of. "She's using advanced evasion techniques," Wright commented to the senior instructor monitoring the exercise. "Look at these movement patterns. She's not just avoiding patrols randomly. She's predicting their search patterns and staying ahead of their decision cycle." The senior instructor, Major Stevens, had been thinking the same thing. Her background check showed emergency medical experience, but this level of tactical thinking suggests additional training. "Should we look into it further?" Wright's expression was unreadable. "Continue monitoring. I want to see how she handles pressure when things get more challenging." As if summoned by his words, the exercise took an unexpected turn when one of the pursuit teams reported that they had captured Jake Morrison's entire team. The circumstances of their capture revealed poor tactical decisions and leadership failures that had exposed them to detection unnecessarily. When the captured recruits were brought to the central monitoring station for debriefing, Jake immediately began blaming his team members for the failure. "They wouldn't follow orders," he complained to the instructors. "Some people just don't have what it takes when things get serious." Colonel Wright observed this debriefing session with particular interest. Leadership under pressure revealed character in ways that normal exercises could not, and Jake's response to failure was telling him everything he needed to know about the recruit's suitability for advanced training. Meanwhile, Maya's team continued to make steady progress toward their extraction point. As the second night of the exercise approached, they found themselves being pursued more aggressively by instructor teams who had been ordered to increase pressure on the remaining teams. The situation became critical when Maya realized that their intended route to the extraction point was being systematically sealed off by pursuit teams. Standard evasion tactics would no longer be sufficient, and she would need to use more advanced techniques to avoid capture. "We're going to have to move through their search pattern instead of around it," Maya told her team during a planning session. "It's more dangerous, but they won't expect us to move toward areas they've already searched." Sarah Williams looked skeptical. "That sounds like a huge risk. If we guess wrong about their timing, we'll walk right into them." Maya's response revealed the depth of her experience. Sometimes the most dangerous approach is actually the safest because nobody expects it. But everyone needs to understand that this isn't theoretical anymore. We're going to be moving through areas where one mistake means capture. Her team agreed to follow her plan, influenced by her consistent track record of successful decision-making throughout the training program. As they began implementing the high-risk maneuver, Colonel Wright received reports about their movements with growing attention. "She's attempting a reverse infiltration through the search cordon," Wright observed, studying the tracking data. "That's an advanced special operations technique. Who taught her that?" Major Stevens was equally puzzled. "According to her file, she should have no knowledge of those tactics, but her execution is textbook perfect." The maneuver required precise timing and nerves of steel. Maya's team moved through areas that had been searched earlier, staying ahead of the pursuit team's rotation schedule by minutes. One miscalculation would have put them directly in the path of heavily equipped instructor teams with night vision and radio coordination. But Maya's planning was flawless. She guided her team through the search cordon and reached their extraction point with time to spare, having avoided capture through a combination of tactical skill and leadership that impressed even the experienced instructors monitoring the exercise. When all surviving teams were gathered for the final debriefing, Colonel Wright requested to speak with the recruits individually. He interviewed each person about their experience during the exercise, but his conversation with Maya lasted significantly longer than the others. Outstanding performance, Wright began, studying her file as he spoke. Your tactical decision-making and leadership under pressure were exceptional. Tell me about your background before joining this program. Maya provided a careful summary of her emergency medical experience, emphasizing the high-stress environments and life-or-death decision-making that had prepared her for military training. Her answers were truthful, but incomplete, focusing on aspects of her background that explained her performance without revealing everything. Wright listened carefully, asking follow-up questions that seemed casual but were clearly designed to probe for information not included in her official file. His questions suggested knowledge about her that shouldn't have been available through normal channels. Finally, Wright closed her file and looked at her directly. Maya Johnson, he said slowly, also known by another name in certain military circles, a name that carries considerable respect among people who understand special operations. Maya's carefully maintained composure showed the first crack it had displayed during the entire training program. Her eyes widened slightly as she realized that her background was not as private as she had believed. I think there's been some mistake, sir, she replied carefully. I'm just a paramedic who wanted to serve her country. Wright smiled for the first time since his arrival. There's no mistake, Black Viper Mark. Your performance during Operation Desert Storm with the Special Medical Rescue Unit is still studied at advanced tactical schools. 3 confirmed enemy kills while providing medical support under fire, extraction of wounded personnel from hostile territory, and tactical leadership that saved the lives of an entire special operations team. The words hit the assembled recruits like a physical blow. Black Viper Mark was a legendary designation in military circles, awarded only to special operations personnel who had demonstrated exceptional courage and skill in combat situations. Tommy Chen's mouth dropped open as pieces of a puzzle suddenly fell into place. Sarah Williams stared in shock, realizing that she had been training alongside someone whose military exploits were the stuff of legend. But the biggest reaction came from Jake Morrison, who had been standing nearby and heard every word of Wright's revelation. The woman he had been mocking and undermining throughout the training program was not only a combat veteran, but someone whose tactical abilities had been proven under the most extreme conditions possible. That's impossible, Jake stammered. She's just a paramedic. She can't be some kind of special forces hero. Colonel Wright turned his attention to Jake with the kind of cold stare reserved for people who had revealed their fundamental character flaws. Recruit Morrison, your performance during this training program has been marked by consistent inability to recognize competence in others, failure to adapt to leadership from anyone you perceive as inferior, and a tendency to blame others for your own tactical failures. Wright paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. Maya Johnson volunteered for this training program not because she needs to prove herself, but because she wanted to contribute her skills to training the next generation of military personnel. Your failure to recognize her capabilities says nothing about her and everything about your own limitations. The revelation transformed the dynamic among the recruits instantly. Those who had supported Maya's leadership throughout training felt vindicated in their judgment. Those who had questioned her abilities found themselves re-evaluating not just their assessment of her, but their own capacity for recognizing competence when it didn't match their preconceptions. Maya herself remained quiet during the exchange, neither confirming nor denying Wright's statements. She had spent years trying to build a civilian life after her military service, and having her combat record exposed was not something she had anticipated or desired. But Wright was not finished. The Black Viper mark designation is not given lightly. It represents the highest level of performance under combat conditions, combining tactical brilliance with physical courage and leadership ability that inspires others to exceed their own limitations. He looked around at the assembled recruits. You have been training alongside someone whose capabilities most of you will never approach, regardless of how much effort you invest. But more importantly, you have had the opportunity to learn from someone who understands what it means to lead when failure means people die. The training program continued for 2 more weeks, but the atmosphere was completely different. Maya found herself in the unusual position of being both a recruit and an informal instructor, with other trainees seeking her advice on tactical problems and leadership challenges. Jake Morrison's attitude changed dramatically once he understood who he had been challenging throughout the program. His initial resentment evolved into grudging respect, though his ego prevented him from acknowledging his mistakes openly. When graduation day arrived, Maya finished at the top of her class, as everyone had expected once her background was revealed. But her real achievement was not her individual performance. It was the way she had demonstrated that leadership and competence could emerge from unexpected sources, and that prejudice and preconceptions prevented people from recognizing excellence when it stood right in front of them. Colonel Wright presented the graduation certificates personally, but his conversation with Maya after the ceremony was private and brief. "Thank you for your service, then and now," he said simply. "Your willingness to go through this training again to help prepare others for what they might face represents the best values of military service." Maya's response was equally brief. Everyone deserves the chance to be judged by their actions rather than their appearance. I hope some of these recruits learned that lesson. As the graduation ceremony concluded and recruits prepared to move on to their next assignments, the story of the woman they had mocked became a legend that would be shared in military circles for years to come. It served as a powerful reminder that competence and courage could emerge from anywhere, and that the most dangerous prejudice was the kind that prevented people from recognizing excellence when it didn't match their expectations.